trickle-down doesn't work. It's bullshit. There's no such thing as trickle-down economics where, the $4 latte that you and I buy in here in the US somehow, trickles back down to the end farmer. It doesn't work unless there's a transparent, traceable supply chain and the desire on the part of the roasting company or the retailer to make sure the farmers share in that wealth creation.
To kind of just set the stage for our listeners, what is fair trade so we can launch into this thing?
Fair trade is it's a philosophy, it's a movement, and it's also a standard. So philosophically speaking, the pioneers of fair trade thought of trade as a way to help people in the developing world, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, rise out of poverty without being dependent on foreign aid or charity. And so their slogan was trade, not aid. And that's what I mean by it's a philosophy. It's an approach, a distinct approach to alleviating poverty that's grounded in the market. It's a movement. Activists and students and businesses and consumers and farmers and workers all around the world have come together to build this platform where everyone wins, where farmers and workers get more money, where the environment is protected, where businesses are able to achieve a more sustainable supply chain, and where you and I as consumers get to feel delighted about helping farmers and their families all around the world through something as simple as a banana or a cup of coffee. So that's what I mean by movement. And then the standard piece of it is that, like organics, the Fair Trade Standard is a 200-point checklist of social, labor, and environmental criteria that farms and factories around the world aspire to and meet. And they open themselves up to an annual audit by our auditors. And if they pass their audit, then they're allowed for a year to wear that Fair Trade certified label on their product, on their coffee or their apparel or whatever it is that we certified. And that in turn earns them a price premium from our market partners. Now more than 2,000 companies from Patagonia and PepsiCo to Whole Foods and Walmart. And so that's kind of the secret sauce of the fair trade model, that when these producers are meeting that high bar of sustainability and responsibility in their production, the market rewards them and pays them more money, which in turn drives these incredible outcomes at the local level, from health and education to housing and clean water.
Yeah, and your point about trade, not aid. So I see, and I work with a lot of nonprofits, and I've been all over the world, and with the best of intentions, really trying to lean in and help people and do everything for them, give them money and all of it, and they become dependent, lowers internal fulfillment, lowers self-esteem, and they stop doing for themselves to a large degree. And what you're talking about with trade, that is sustainable going forward. So it means you went by that fairly quickly, but it's so important, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have lived this firsthand over the course of the last 35 years, working with farmer groups who have come together to form associative businesses, usually cooperatives, that would enable them to have the economies of scale, the volume, to process their own raw agricultural harvest and add value and then export direct to global markets. And through that more equitable model of trade, been able to bring the resources back to their communities to improve their own lives. And so to your point, the invisible dividend, if you will, is the hope and the pride and the self-confidence and the dignity of changing your own life, of becoming the architect of your own future, and not waiting for government or some well-intentioned NGO or charitable group to come in and improve your life for you.
Yeah. And what you're doing is actually building that self-reliance where the self-esteem and fulfillment comes from. That's the right way to do it. There needs to be some, I think, effort to help nonprofits understand that are giving aid and actually holding people back in a way. So we're talking about environmental and we're talking about social. here. And so the environmental piece, I've always thought, for a long time, that's probably one of the biggest threats to the world, just not being good stewards of the environment. Even with my aerospace company we had a very large electroplating shop, very dangerous chemicals and all of it. I chose to basically put the infrastructure in place to have zero sanitary sewer discharge, zero. Super expensive, four layers of or levels of containment. We evaporated off the water and we recycled the rest of the material. And that was really expensive. And a lot of companies would say, well, we can't do that because it's too expensive. And our competitors, one by one, lost the capability. And we grew because we did that. So as I was, going through your book and looking at this business case, make the business case, I just wrote down, because it's so true, the business case for doing this correctly with the environment and your people is you make more money, you grow faster, you sustain it longer, and you can sell for more when the time comes. I don't know how that resonates. This is true. Beyond we feel good, I've experienced it as being 100% objectively true.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, in the world of coffee, quality is a key success factor, right? So companies from Nespresso and Green Mountain Coffee to small local roasters, we work with over 600 coffee roasting companies around the country and around the world, and they depend on high quality beans in order to delight us, the consumer, with that product. The quality of the bean is determined by the farmer, right? And it has to do with agroecological factors like, the soil and the climate and the variety of the coffee bean. But it also has to do with how farmers are managing the coffee trees, how they're managing the land, the soil fertility, how they're managing drought, or rainfall, water access, how they're harvesting, if they're harvesting the ripest, reddest cherries, or if they're harvesting too soon, and because green, when you harvest a green coffee bean, it, like any green fruit, it has a different flavor. So the quality of our experience as a consumer, and therefore the success of any coffee company that we're buying from, depends on the farmer. So naturally, coffee companies began to discover 10, 20, 30 years ago that they had a shared fate with the farmer and the ecosystem, that they couldn't ignore the plight of the farmers. And when we came on the scene in the late 1990s, I launched Fair Trade USA, the leading certifier of fair trade products, launched it in 98. Coffee prices in the global market were at an all-time low. Coffee farmers were literally starving. And it was in the newspapers every week, the drumbeat in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And so it was a thing. And companies began to realize not only were their reputations at risk, because the $3 latte was just becoming a thing. So companies were making windfall profits. Farmers were struggling to survive. There's something wrong with this picture, right? Reputationally, there was an issue there. But beyond that, the coffee industry really woke up to the fact that if farmers were struggling to put food on the table, there's no way that they could invest in the quality of the product. There's no way that they could steward the land so that there would be continuous supply of high quality beans. And so this connection between the social or human side of the product, the farmers, the environmental side, like the land and the quality of the soil and the ecosystem that impacts the quality, and then the experience of the companies and the consumers. For me, it became really clear early in our journey that there was a business case, that companies would come to fair trade, not just because it's the right thing to do to make sure that your farmers aren't going hungry, but that also there's a business case which allows companies to join our cause for enlightened self-interest. And I think that's been, a driving factor in the fair trade movement for the last 26 years.
Yeah, 100% agree. You have to do it right to make it all work in there. So I get that the farmers do better, and I bet there's a lot of middleman cutting out in there too, or reducing. So you could actually pay more for the beans and still save money because you're cutting
Yes,
out a lot of that
that's right.
burdensome, middleman stuff.
Yeah.
And I did that in aerospace. We went directly to operators instead of going through big manufacturers. So if the farmers do better, and I get that, does your audit checklist go right down to the workers in the field? Because I could imagine sometimes they'd want to just like the middleman going through saying, "Hey, 10 cents a pound." They're doing the same thing to their workers. Or how do you deal with that?
So we work with a number of different types of producers around the world. One group is what is often referred to as smallholders or small family farmers. In the coffee industry, a small farmer is someone who has 3 acres. 3 acres, right? So they're producing, a few thousand pounds a year. And so with that small a landholding and that small a volume, you really have to come together with your neighbors to create enough volume to export your own product and capture that value. And to your point, to jump over the middleman and go direct to the international market in a way that allows you to capture value. So that's kind of one population group in fair trade. And the issue there is really, how do we get more of the price of the product back to the farmer? Because normally in global economics and in global trade, trickle down doesn't work. It's bullshit. There's no such thing as trickle down economics where, the $4 latte that you and I buy in here in the US somehow, trickles back down to the end farmer. It doesn't work unless there's a transparent, traceable supply chain and the desire on the part of the roasting company or the retailer to make sure the farmers share in that wealth creation. So that's one population group, one beneficiary of fair trade. We also work with workers. So in answer to your question, the workers on a large farm or the workers in a factory are the beneficiaries of fair trade in a number of ways. Number one, safer, healthier workplaces. I visited a rose farm in Ecuador a few years ago and got to see firsthand the impact of our workers' safety measures in the Ecuadorian rose sector, because there, most roses are grown in greenhouses and they have to use pesticides on the roses in order to keep bugs, from chewing the petals and making them ineligible for export to the US market. It's a 90% female workforce. And so women historically have been in the greenhouses with high levels of toxicity because the roses were sprayed and then they would go right in after the spraying. So birth defects and cancer rates in the Ecuadorian rose sector historically were sky high. So part of the fair trade standard, number one, a long list of chemicals are not allowed at all. The most toxic chemicals are not allowed in the fair trade standard. You can go, in fact, the fair trade standard is so rigorous, you can go to Home Depot today and buy Roundup, right? Well, fair trade farmers are not allowed to use Roundup. Roundup is very toxic. And so, we have rigorous controls on what chemicals are used, number one. Number two, the workers have to be educated about what exposure to these chemicals means, because education is power, knowledge is power. And then number three, our fair trade standards have a lockdown protocol. So depending on the chemical that's used and its level of toxicity, once the roses are sprayed, the greenhouse is literally locked for anywhere from 8 to 48 hours until the level of toxicity comes down, and then people are allowed to go back in. So, you ask, are the workers taken care of in a fair trade setup, on these large rose farms? Task number one is to keep workers safe. And, we talked to the workers there and they said, we feel safe going to work now. But it's also about wages. And there's this fair trade premium, which is the extra money that brands pay. So for example, fair trade roses, you can get them at Whole Foods. And by the way, Mother's Day is coming up. So go get your mom a dozen fair trade roses. The label is right there on the package. The fair trade premium, or the impact premium, as we call it, in the case of roses, is 1 penny per stem. But over the course of a year, that means literally hundreds of thousands of dollars are flowing back to each farm, and the workers get to decide how to spend that money. I don't get to decide. Whole Foods, the buyer doesn't get to decide. The workers meet and they discuss and debate the different projects that they want and end up choosing amazing life transforming projects like scholarships for their kids or health insurance for their extended family or housing and so on. So does fair trade take care of the workers? Absolutely. That's the punchline of this.
And Paul, for our listeners, they get a better price, in this case for the coffee, and a premium is paid that they get to use in their community. And so in your book, you talk about shoes matter, like education is free, but you can't go if you don't have shoes.
Yeah.
So it's $200 a year, if I remember it right, for the kids to be able to go to school, and the money goes to things like that. So talk through some of those impact stories, because that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of that rose farm, just to riff on that, the meeting that we had with the women was so illuminating because they talked about feeling safer at work thanks to these safety protocols. And then we asked, well, what did you do with the fair trade premium? And on that farm, they chose to build a laundromat. Then you might ask, well, why? I know that's random. Ecuadorian rose workers don't make enough money to buy washing machines. It's incredibly rare that an Ecuadorian rose worker, farm worker, would make enough money to buy a washing machine. So how do they wash their clothes? In the river. It's a 5.5 day work week. So they work Monday through Friday and up until noon on Saturday. So typically Sunday mornings are spent knee deep in the river, washing clothes by hand in this ice cold water. So the workers, after much discussion, this was like the second year that they were fair trade certified and had money coming in. They said, let's build a laundromat. So the owner of the farm gave them a small piece of land adjacent to the farm right there at work. And with the fair trade premium, they built a wash house and they put a bunch of washers and dryers in it, and they hired a couple of workers. And so this service is available to all the workers on the farm. They can bring in their dirty clothes on any, day of the week that they're working, drop them off in the morning. Those clothes get washed and dried and folded. And by the end of the day, when your shift is over, you pick up your clean clothes and go home. And this woman, Johanna Quinteros, who, was telling us this story and actually showed us the wash house. She said, we used to spend our Sundays in the river, and fair trade gave us our Sundays back. And, just thinking about being able to spend Sunday with your family, with your kids, rather than knee deep in ice cold river water washing clothes. I mean, it's incredibly transformative. Some things that you and I take for granted, but which around the world can mean significant improvements in people's lives.
Yeah, I used to do business in 60 different countries, so I've seen a lot, and we do take a lot for granted in the United States. And from your book, you said you're based in Costa Rica. Is that where you're at today?
No. I live in California. I live in Berkeley, California.
Okay.
I lived in Nicaragua for a decade,
Okay.
from 83 to 94, but I've been here in the San Francisco Bay Area ever since.
Okay. Yeah, you founded it in 98 in Oakland, but I thought I read you were based in Costa Rica. I guess I missed that. So sorry
I wish, man.
Yeah,
This whole thing is from Costa Rica. I mean, I love the field. You think you're talking to Paul, but I'm actually Pablo, and I can rock the mustache and dance salsa with the best of them. So someday I'll move to Costa Rica or someplace like it.
Yeah, it's definitely beautiful. So what I've always thought that I don't like the term capitalism. I wish we called it value creationism, and I wish the world was set up completely equitable and best value wins no matter where you're at. So that's important to me. And in all the countries I've done business with, it's never been equitable from a tax or tariff or barrier perspective on how I did it. We still have to figure out a way to win. And I actually think, I don't like the term trickle down, but I actually believe, Paul, that it does work as long as everyone in the supply chain has the right perspective and the right education. And so what I'm getting from the work that you're doing is that you're giving them the right perspective and education and how to put these co-ops together and skip the middleman and have access to the markets and all of it. And I believe everybody in the supply chain, the workers, the farmers, everybody, all the way to, let's say, Starbucks or any of those, they all want to get their best deal. And I think with the right education and perspective, they'll position themselves well in the system. And I think that's what's missing. So challenge that. I get the inequities and all of it. I think it can work. I just think there's way too many out there rigging the game in their favor, not making it win-win. And that's the problem in my view is that particular class of folks that will do that.
I've been working with farmers in Latin America around the world since 1983. And I've had a chance to visit a lot of farms. We work with 70 countries now around the world, throughout Latin America and also in Africa and Asia. And we also certify farms here in the US. And so I've seen how crops are grown. I've been in apparel factories throughout Asia. I've seen how clothes are made. I've seen the conditions. And, I feel like historically, American business didn't really care about the supply chain and much less the lives of the people and the ecosystems where things came from. I think there was a very high level of indifference, almost like, don't ask, don't tell mentality. I think when people would, buyers, for example, apparel buyers here in the US would go to China or go to Vietnam or Bangladesh or Cambodia, they would certainly see the deplorable conditions in those factories. We certainly had access to, information about the wage rates of those workers. The conditions are, what you and I would probably call sweatshop conditions. Similarly, in West Africa, in Ivory Coast and Ghana, those two countries produce 60% of the world's cacao. Cacao is the key ingredient in chocolate. And child labor is very much the norm. Why? Not because parents don't care about their kids. It's because cacao farmers live in poverty. And so when you live in poverty, sometimes you need the extra labor from your 9, 10-year-old and up kid to help make ends meet. Or you live in a community that's so remote that there are no schools. And so rather than leaving a 6-year-old at home when you go to the field, the home alone, you bring the kid to the fields because there's no school. And so these were not secrets. There is a dark side of business. There is something called corporate greed, where people in American business turned a blind eye for decades to the plight of farmers and workers around the world that brought us our chocolate and brought us our clothes. And I'm not going to apologize for that, and I'm not going to deny it. It's there, it exists, and there's good news. There's good news, and that is that capitalism is evolving. And I've seen it in the 40 years that I've been traveling the world, visiting farms and factories and working with companies. I can tell you emphatically today that there's a growing cohort of corporate CEOs who feel co-responsible. They may not own the cocoa field in Ghana where children are being employed. They may not own the factory in Cambodia where sweatshop wages are being paid, but they understand that their reputation is linked to those realities. And they understand from a values perspective. They want to make their kids happy. They don't want to, suck the blood of the planet during the day and then go home and pretend that they didn't do that at night, right? I have found that corporate leaders, and I've befriended thousands of them, want to do the right thing. They're looking for the business case, right? For this more sustainable supply chain, for this more ethical supply chain. And so, in chocolate, for example, we work with great brands. Bark Thins and Guittard and Unreal and all kinds of great, usually smaller brands that are really going deep, first and foremost, in getting that supply chain transparency so that they know who the farmers are that they're co-responsible for, so that they can get visibility into, is there child labor on that farm or not, right? And can we get it audited? So if you don't see an audit label, if you don't see a certification label on your chocolate, there's just no way of knowing if there's child labor in it or not. I don't believe in guilt tripping people into anything. I'm not telling our listeners about this to make you feel guilty over your favorite brand of chocolate. But what I am saying is that child labor is still all too common in the chocolate industry. And the only way you know that it's not there is if there's a certification label, either organics or fair trade or Rainforest Alliance or any of the many certifications that are out there. And that's why my message with my book is every purchase matters. You have a choice. You can choose an uncertified, no-name, highly prized chocolate and not really know the conditions that was made in. Or you can choose something that's certified and that's sustainable and that gives you the assurance that you're not doing harm in the world. That makes you feel good about the impact, the positive impact that you can have with every purchase. Every purchase matters.
Yeah,
I gotta hold up my book, bro.
the
My
book.
book is launched. I'm so excited. My first one. You're like a published author. This is the untold story of the fair trade movement. It is my life's work in 330 pages.
I think it's amazing. There's the awareness. There's the I think there is whatever you can call it, evil, whatever. But there are those that don't care.
Yeah.
And I love that if we give farmers better information, they can be positioned better to not be taken advantage of. And I think the business case here, as I'm listening to this, is just to add to it, which you know, again, you touched on it in your book, retention and a lot of things. But if we get it right for the employees, for me, it's about productive engagement. What if productive engagement doubled with your team? For the large company that's buying it, if we're making sure our suppliers are winning, everybody wants to help each other win. And I can go back to previous businesses where I really wanted our suppliers and customers to win. And when we all felt that way, we gave each other a second chance to be the best value alternative. And I would have some customers that were just full on win-lose negotiating.
Yeah.
I could care less whether they won or not. I wanted to work with all these other folks out there. So the business case is we can sustain it longer and ensure greater success and growth.
Yeah.
So I think you're right on with what you're doing there. I've heard you talk about this in an interview in terms of finding your purpose. So you had it pretty early. I think most people probably don't find their purpose. What led to you? Did you find this, or it just plopped in your lap one day and you ran with it at an early age?
I was raised by a single mom who grew up on a farm in Oklahoma during the Great Depression. My mother's father, my grandfather, was a cotton picker, a farm worker. And so I grew up listening to stories about how hard life was back on the farm. And so from a very young age, I felt an affinity, a sympathy, and an empathy with farming folk. And at the university, I studied international development and sustainable agriculture. And so by the time I finished college in 1983, I knew what I wanted to do was go abroad and work with farmers. And so in the summer of 1983, I bought a one-way ticket to Nicaragua. And I went off to work with farmers. I lived way up in the mountains, very remote forested villages. I thought I would stay for a couple of years. I stayed for 11 years. I was 22 years old when I went away. I was 33 when I came home. And it was just an amazing adventure. And I had a chance to work on a number of different international aid-funded projects during my first few years there. And I came to realize that often international aid, as well-intentioned as it is, it doesn't always hit the mark in terms of sustainable economic development. And so it was kind of by accident in the summer of 1990 that I heard about fair trade. And like I said earlier, the fair traders' mantra was trade, not aid. And their approach was, instead of raising, charitable donations to help Nicaraguan farmers, Paul Rice, if you just organize farmers into a co-op and sell direct to us, we'll pay you more money, fabulously more money. So there was a pioneering fair trade coffee company in Boston, Massachusetts at the time called Equal Exchange. And they were our first buyer. We exported one container in 1990 to Equal Exchange. They paid us over $1 a pound at a time when the local market price for coffee being paid by the middlemen in Nicaragua was 10 cents, 10 cents a pound, literally 10 times more money. And so, just to put that into perspective, most of our farmers were producing around 2,000 pounds of coffee a year on an acre or two. 2,000 pounds times 10 cents a pound, which is what their neighbors were getting, would be a total cash income of $200 for the entire year, like less than $1 a day. So you can see how lack of market access often locks farmers around the world into multi-generational cycles of poverty. By getting our farmers $1 a pound, $1 times 2,000 pounds, $2,000, we paid at the end of that season, we paid roughly $2,000 to every family that had joined the co-op that first year. And most of them have never seen that much money in their lives. And it allowed them to stay on the land. A lot of discussion about immigration right now. Most people immigrate to the U.S. Fleeing poverty. Our farmers were able to stay home, stay on the land. They were making enough money to provide for their families, to keep their kids in school. We dug wells and brought clean drinking water into our villages for the first time. We reforested hillsides that had been deforested years before. We ran healthcare programs. We had educational programs like the scholarship program you mentioned earlier. $200 a year was enough to keep a kid in school because it bought shoes and uniforms and backpacks and school supplies. So we sent a whole generation of kids on to high school and then on to college. And, the punchline, as we said earlier, is that none of this was thanks to anyone's charity. It was farmers developing a viable international export business that brought them enough wealth to develop their communities. And so, pride and self-reliance and dignity were the most impressive and inspiring part of this whole journey for me. And so at that point, there was one or two fair trade companies in the US, but there was no movement. The fair trade movement was taking off in Europe. And so we were selling to Europe and realizing we have to try and bring the movement from Europe to the US. And that, I had kind of an existential crisis in 1994 and had to decide, was I Paul or was I Pablo? Right? Was I going to spend the rest of my days with my Nicaraguan wife and my Nicaraguan son, working with these campesinos, with these farmers? It was, the greatest joy of my life to share the journey with them, the journey of hope and transformation. And I didn't want to leave. I thought I would stay in Nicaragua for the rest of my days. And yet I felt a calling. I felt like I had to come back and see if I could bring the fair trade movement to the U.S. So that's what I did. I came back in '94. I got an MBA at UC Berkeley, which was a great place for learning about entrepreneurship at the time. And then I launched Fair Trade USA in 1998, and I ran it for 26 years and just stepped down a couple of months ago. So I'm on to the next chapter.
All right. Well, scaling the movement is worthwhile, and that's an incredible purpose. And I've found mine, and it's threaded into absolutely everything I do. And it'd be nice if more people can find something like that to really keep them moving going forward. One of the questions I had from the book was the story you were talking about. What was the emotional response when you gave about $2,000 to each of the farmers that have never seen that before? What did that feel like in the room? And has it sustained itself now in all these years?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, that day in the schoolhouse in a community called Santo Domingo, we got up at the blackboard, because it was a blackboard with chalk, and we kind of walked all the families through the numbers. Right? Here's what we got. We got $1.20 per pound for our coffee, and the sacks cost this much, and the processing cost that much, and the transportation and the export license and the this and the that and this and the that, and net price to you $1 per pound. And then we had a clipboard with every farmer's name. There were 24 families, and we called out the name. Juan Rivera, come forward and get your money. And I had a fishing tackle box full of cash. I mean, these are dirt poor farmers. Most of them were illiterate. None of them had bank accounts. So we paid them in cash, $2,000 worth in local currency, Cordobas. And, everyone had shown up with great skepticism because they didn't know what Pablito had done with their coffee. And none of us knew if this experiment would work. And so, I mean, it was an incredibly joyful day. Everyone was overjoyed. We threw a big party. There was, local quartet, kind of like mariachi type music, because this is kind of a, mountainous cowboy type of community, and everyone danced, and there was lots of rum and lots of celebration, and people started calling me Pablo $1, $1 Paul, because that was like the mantra. We got everyone $1 per pound, and I was Pablo, so I was Pablo $1. And I probably should have run for mayor at that point. I was a popular boy. We got really lucky. We knocked it out of the park that first year. And so we went from 24 families to 3,000 families pretty quickly over the next couple of years. I led the co-op for 4 years. And then in 94, I handed off to my Nicaraguan colleague, a woman named Rosario, who proceeded to double sales in 2 years. So it was a great story for me of, as a social entrepreneur, having a vision and the courage and the wherewithal to start something and get it started, and then get the hell out of the way and hand it off to others who could do better. And it was a beautiful experience. And I go back to Nicaragua all the time, and obviously I go back to visit, farmers that I've known now since the 90s, in some cases since the 80s. And it's just such a beautiful story to be a part of.
And is the state of it the same? They're continuing to build and grow and have the same, I guess, financial rewards for what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's multi-generational now. So the first generation, the farmers that I brought together in 1990 and in the early 90s, their kids all went to high school. Many of them went to college. Like my buddy Santiago Rivera, who I talk about in the book, his daughter Yolanda was 16 and had to drop out of school, couldn't go on to high school because they couldn't afford it, couldn't afford the shoes and the bus money. The co-op set up a scholarship fund. Yolanda got back into school after being out for 2 years, just kind of helping out on the farm. She got back into school. She was the first woman to finish high school in the history of their community. And then she went on to college, again, with support from this Fair Trade Scholarship Fund. She got a degree in biology, and she didn't move to the big city, to get a big salary from, some big hospital. She moved back to the village, and she works in the healthcare clinic back in her village, and is, a real, I would say, an icon, a local hero for all the girls in that community who are wondering, can they ever aspire to be anything more than a farmer's daughter and then a farmer's wife? Well, yeah, there's Yolanda, and she's a professional, and she's serving her community. So now Yolanda's daughter, so third generation, just graduated high school, and she wants to be an agronomist. And I love seeing, especially women and girls, find their voice and find their confidence in communities around the world where maybe historically there was a lot of machismo and where men dominated the scene. And so for me, it's one of the most inspiring things about the fair trade movement, that so many women and girls are able to kind of redefine their role in the community and take on leadership roles and become professionals and contribute in ways that weren't possible before.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And all the business I've done in Latin America, there is a lot of machismo and where that goes. And I think it does push women off to the side and down a bit. So that's amazing. I know you have to have studied this a whole lot more than I have, but the awareness of this, I feel like most people are just completely unaware when consumers buy.
Yeah.
What are the best efforts moving that in the right direction?
It's a great question. It's something that we think about every day at Fair Trade. We have 67% consumer awareness of our Fair Trade certified label. So I'm going to grab a product here. So when you go to Trader Joe's, you're going to see a whole bunch of different kinds of Fair Trade coffee. And here's our label, Fair Trade certified. 67% of American adults That's about 150 million people recognize that label. They've seen that label before, but not everyone understands what it means. And of course, the name kind of communicates that it's something positive, fair and certified, So I think in general, there's a positive association with the fair trade label, even among people who don't know exactly what it means. Um, but, that is the challenge, to build not just awareness, but understanding. And once we build understanding, to build motivation and behavioral change, to help consumers realize that everything we buy has some impact in the world, right? Either for good or not. Um, it has an impact on the environment. It has an impact on climate. It has an impact on farmers and workers and their families. And so we truly do have a chance to vote with our dollars for a better world, and to bring our purchasing decisions, the things that we buy for ourselves and our families, in alignment with the world we want to see, and the people we want to be, and how we want to feel about ourselves. I don't think anyone wants to feel like with a chocolate bar, they're somehow putting a kid to work in the field. No one wants that. And so, there's this do no harm ethos, especially millennials and Gen Z. They don't want to feel like their products are contributing to climate change, right? There's a lot of climate anxious young people out there. And so companies are feeling both the pressure and the opportunity to provide products that are more responsible, that are more environmentally and socially responsible. So I really see opportunity, tremendous opportunity for business, and educating consumers to reward companies for doing the right thing is a big part of what we do, without a doubt. And I think storytelling is part of the challenge, and technology makes that easier than ever, right? So, imagine here's one of my favorite brands, Numi Tea. They're almost 100%. They're like 95% fair trade. Here's the label, and they have a picture of a child on it. So, they're trying to communicate to you when you buy the product, you're helping kids. But what if every product had a QR code on it that you could scan either at the grocery store or when you get back home, and that QR code took you back to the community and the family that made that tea or that coffee, that banana, whatever the product is, so that you could have a much more intimate sense of the difference that you made with that purchase? Wouldn't that be so incredibly uplifting? Lee, I know you talk about creating not just material value, but spiritual value and emotional value. Think about the emotional value and the spiritual uplift of being able to feel part of the story through your purchase. And so, and technology enables that now, right? We're actually building end-to-end village to grocery store storytelling capabilities, so that, in the not so distant future, every fair trade product will have that link to the families that we helped through our purchases. I think that's going to elevate awareness. I think it's going to elevate the desire on the part of consumers to choose products that make a difference.
Yeah. I think it'd be amazing to have a QR code and you can see the entire supply chain impact from where it started to in your hand in the line at the grocery store, for example.
Yeah.
So what I think trust is a force that's has to be a bit of a challenge for you. I've gone to a number of, when it comes to communicating this, I've gone to a number of conscious capitalism events over the years.
Yeah.
And there's an unfortunately large percentage of companies, I call it business virtue signaling. They say, look how good we are, so you buy from us. When I look into the companies, there are none of those things. Yeah. And in the book, you call it, as it greenwashing, right? Going through. Yeah. There's a lot of controversy around labels like certified organic. Well, what can you put in there and still call it that? And do you have one leaf that's organic and all this Roundup leaves are surrounding it? How do we even know to trust anymore? And it's the same in politics. Everything's a giant spin. It's not about creating more value in the world, which is what I'm all about in my messaging. So kind of busting through that. What's your thinking there to bust through and gain more trust?
Yeah, trust is super important. Trust and authenticity, and you put your finger on the heart of The issue that drove me to start a certification agency, Fair Trade USA, the organization that I started in 1998 and led for 26 years, is the leading independent third-party certifier of fair trade products in North America. And I chose to do that rather than just, coming back from Nicaragua and starting a fair trade coffee company and telling the world, I'm fair trade, take my word for it. I care about farmers and I care about preserving the land. Take my word for it. I came back to create an agency, to create an organization that would instill trust in companies and their claims, because we know consumers are often skeptical of unverified corporate claims of do-gooding. And the larger the company, the more skeptical the consumer is. And, I'll give you an example. Driscoll's strawberries, right? We all know Driscoll's is the leading brand of berries in the U.S., from strawberries and blueberries to raspberries and blackberries. And Driscoll's had a rigorous in-house code of conduct, right? I mean, they really held them. They created a code of conduct around how they wanted to treat their workers and how they wanted to treat the land. And it was rigorous. And they would hire inspectors to come in and visit the farms and verify the conditions. I mean, I believe Driscoll's from 100 years ago to today really cared about farm workers and about the land. But they got into a pickle about 10 years ago in Baja California with farm workers who were unhappy, who distrusted the company and wanted to put pressure on the company. And so there was a strike, and then there was a boycott of Driscoll's berries up here in the U.S. About 10 years ago. And so Driscoll's came to us and they said, look, we mean well, but we need help. We need help. Not just to get the activists off our backs. That wasn't the impetus. They wanted us to help them figure out how to strengthen their internal standards, how to bring in outside auditing that would lend credibility and trust to the claim that they were doing the best that they could by the farm workers and by the land. And so, we debated it in fair trade. Do we want to get in partnership with a company that's being scrutinized and attacked? And my response was, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Of course we want to come to the aid of any company that wants to do better. Now, obviously they have to meet the standard. They have to, they can't do a token amount. They need to go big in tackling the problem. And they were willing to. And so we've had a very, fruitful, no pun intended, partnership with Driscoll's now for, 7 or 8 years. They have certified 100% of all the production coming out of Baja California as fair trade certified. So you'll see our label on Driscoll's berries, not on 100% of the total company. It's about, maybe 15% of the total company. But they have learned, in terms of their own in-house approach, they've learned from the fair trade model. So they're doing better. And they get very high marks from independent organizations for their relationships with labor now. And that is, in my view, it's a great story of intention and how companies are capable of redemption. It's also a great story of what a little bit of pressure can do. I mean, I think activism has definitely played a role over the years in lighting a fire under some companies' butts and getting them to be more proactive and to do more. There's, if fair trade certification is the carrot, sometimes you need a stick out there, to get companies to pick up the pace and do more than they may be doing. So I give credit to the activists. But then I also want to say, to your point about skepticism, consumer skepticism and trust, that I don't think there's any way that without independent third-party certification by fair trade or someone, that Driscoll's could have, kind of flipped the narrative from they're a bad company to, no, actually they're a really good company. I'm very proud of what they're doing. And I'm very proud of the partnership. And I'm proud that fair trade certified label is on that product. So I think similarly, there's probably some skepticism, a little bit of consumer skepticism out there about the labels. Most consumers want labels. Most consumers want independent audits. They don't want to have to trust a company who's saying, yeah, just believe me, I took care of my workers, I'm paying a living wage. How do we know? Some companies talk the talk, other companies walk the talk. And so certification plays that role of verifying what a company's actually doing and giving us the ability to trust and to support.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I want fair trade and the way you're describing it. And I want healthy when I think about food. And what happens, and I want to make sure it's not just sustainable, but it's regenerative as well, because we want to use this for lots of generations, going forward.
Yes.
And I've always thought that capitalism had a inherent morality component to it, because the better we treat everybody in our orbit, the longer we can keep going, better engagement, all of that. If we don't keep our word and we do bad things, we just go down.
Yeah.
So I think it's inherently there. So this feels like just a mission, and I know you've kind of stepped down from leading that, but it's an awareness mission, really, because I think when people are aware, who would not want to do this if they actually have a choice, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right, man. Well, I mean, that's why I called my book "Every Purchase Matters," because I don't think most people are aware of the implications of their daily purchases. I don't know that they're aware that, when they go to the store, they're not necessarily thinking about the farmers and the workers and in the forests around the world that are impacted by our choices. And so at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do with this book and with our movement is to develop a more mindful approach to shopping, right? Where we all realize when we go to the store, oh, well, I'm not just buying on price and quality or flavor or healthiness, right? Those are all important attributes. They always will be. But given that set of parameters, I also have the chance to choose something that's good for the world.
Yeah. No, I love it. And it sounds like you evolved from when you started in 98, from almost an all or nothing mindset to any movement in the right direction is good. And we need to take those steps for big companies to get there. What are your learnings around working with larger companies to help them efficiently, effectively, quickly evolve into that direction more effectively on your end?
The bigger the company, the slower the change. We work with hundreds of small and medium-sized brands, and we also work with some of the largest corporations in the world. I mean, we have a great program with Walmart and Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon, as you know, and Costco and Kroger and Safeway, and all the major retailers are doing are offering fair trade certified products now. And my experience in working with those leaders is that often the leaders of those companies have a vision and a desire, but changing sourcing practices in a large organization often, it takes time. And I think there's also a gap sometimes, Lee, between the aspirations and the vision of a visionary CEO and the, chief sustainability officer on the one hand, and the buyers. So often there's a disconnect there. The CEO will be talking about regenerative and sustainable and the contribution to the world, but then the buyers will still be basically making decisions based on margin, right? The buyers are told, you need to optimize the margin of the products that you're buying for the company, and sustainability is not rewarded. And so that's one of the biggest challenges I see in corporate America is I think the leaders are going forward more quickly in a vision of a regenerative model of capitalism or regenerative business, profit and purpose together. I think, anywhere from a third to a half of corporate leaders are at least starting to talk about, the opportunity to wed people, planet, and profit, and to overcome the trade-off mentality of the past, where either a company could be profitable or it could be sustainable, but not both, right? And I think that trade-off mentality is evolving, especially if you look at like the last 20 years, right? In the arc of shifts, more and more companies realize that they can align sustainability and profitability. And you have major leaders like Larry Fink, with his famous letter, and Doug McMillon, CEO of Walmart, with his speech on regenerative company a few years ago. You have major leaders saying capitalism is evolving, and the trade-off mentality of the past is gone. We need to build businesses with purpose. And you still have buyers and supply chain managers kind of behaving the way they always have. And so I just think there's a journey there and a process and an opportunity for companies to really instill up and down their organizations the necessary incentives and cultural shift, to be able to execute on this vision.
One of the things I've learned is to never underestimate adults' ability to never connect the dots. And so I'm wondering if there's some opportunity here to have a business model coaching around fair trade. This is how it fits in, and this is how it plays out over time.
Yeah.
To get more of them to really get on board. This hour has gone by really fast. We're coming up on it. Did anything stand out in this conversation as interesting to you that we've had here?
All of it. This has been so fun. Yes. Yeah, it's been so fun. We've touched on the business community, we've touched on consumers, and we had a chance to dive into some of these amazing stories of impact, which is what it's all about. Before we started the interview, you made a comment about how there's nothing wrong with feeling good about having a positive impact in the world. And, for the book, we did a bit of research into the neuroscience of compassion, right? So why are humans compassionate? Why are we kind? Why are we altruistic? Why do we do something for other people? Why would someone buy fair trade tea just to help a farmer's kid that they'll never meet? Why do you donate blood? Why do you give to charity? And I think part of the answer is it feels good. Selfishly speaking, it feels good to be a good person. It feels good to think you helped keep a kid in school. It feels good to donate blood and think, I might have saved a life today. It feels good. So there's something really interesting, an interesting dynamic. It is selfish. It is selfishly gratifying to be selfless. And so that's something that we're trying to tap into, right? In the fair trade movement, is telling people, is not guilt tripping people. I mean, I know I talked today about child labor and chocolate and those things. Those are all true. But my message to the public is the uplifting positive impact that you can have in the lives of kids and in protecting the climate, and the environment, the positive impact that we can have through our acts of kindness, through the products we choose. And I just, it's altruism is an act of self gratification, right? And that's okay. That's actually a good thing.
Yeah, it may seem like a small thing, but to me, it's been a big thing for decades, this concept of selfishness, because I believe everybody on the planet does what's in their best self-interest, either for this life or the next. So by definition, they are objectively selfish, but are you on the win-win side of the spectrum or on the win-lose side?
Yeah.
And I want to be as far on the win-win side of selfishness as I can possibly be.
Yeah.
And that's, if I were to have one most important number, personally, it's internal fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
By staying on that side of the spectrum, I'm elevating it every year. I'm not happy all the time. I think that's impossible, but my self-esteem and internal fulfillment climbs consistently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, brother.
All right. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Well, yeah.
Lee, you're awesome. Can I be your friend now?
Oh, 100%. My biggest takeaway is you and I are solving the same problem through from different angles.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
And it's never going away, and I love it. All right. Well, thank you again. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, I certainly did. Please leave a review, and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.